Remember back in the old days when authors would write out their stories word by word, paragraph by paragraph, and page by page, working late into the night like absolute fiends? Yeah, me too. While there are still many human writers like myself who much prefer and insist on the tried and true methods of crafting a story that have existed for centuries, we as a society have the dubious fortune of living in a time where artificial intelligence is taking the world by storm. Including, unfortunately, the arts. If you're on the internet for at least a substantial amount of time a day, you've probably seen many an image or video generated with AI. I've seen quite a lot of these myself. But there also seems to be a worrying uptick in people who like to churn prompts through programs like chatgpt, copy-paste their results in a quote-unquote manuscript, cover up their cursed concoction with some fancy trappings, and pass it off as their own novel while calling themselves writers. If you couldn't guess already, I have a lot of opinions on this. Before we get any further though, I should probably explain why I'm talking about the creative writing industry this time around, as opposed to the visual art-related stuff that I usually cover on the channel. On top of being a comic artist and illustrator, I'm also a writer and a very avid reader. In fact, I love books so much that I got my start on YouTube talking about them, I have a mountain of books that I still need to read, and I also have multiple novel projects that I still have to finish. It's fine. It's fine. While my fondness for writing came about long before I chose cartooning as my career path, being a comic artist involves having at least some knowledge in multiple artistic disciplines. Writing is one of them, but in comics you'll see that more in the form of script writing as opposed to the prose you'll see in novels. Last year I made a 2-video series where I redrew AI images that I had found on Pinterest and discussed the ramifications of the use of generative AI. That was the last time I discussed the impact of AI in the creative space, but in light of some recent events that I will cover in this video that happen to pertain to a topic that I've been passionate about since childhood, I figured I should touch upon it again. I did say in a video last year that AI was only good for inspiration, but nowadays I would personally refrain from that because of the negative environmental impact and the fact that it relies on information that is fed to it by its users. However, if you're really going to go down that route, then you should at the very least be transparent about it and keep the effects of its usage in mind. As for myself though, I like to obtain inspiration for new ideas from the stuff around me in the real world like an all-consuming black hole because I have swag like that. Now, I don't have a problem with analytical AI, the kind that's used to detect diseases years before the projected onset, or the kind of AI that is designed to accomplish otherwise time-consuming menial tasks like lip-syncing the way it was in the remake of Final Fantasy VII, for example. I do have a problem with AI that is trained off of human artists and creators without their consent, which, by the way, is theft, and I have a problem with AI that is used with the intention of completely replacing human artists, which I have many opinions on. But regardless of how you slice the cake here, there is still a long way to go before generative AI can be used in a way that qualifies as ethical, fair, and transparent. And that's if it can attain that status at all. In fact, as of writing the script, it only came out a couple months ago that one self-published author had left a ChatGPT prompt in one of her books, and another well-known author was mentioned by name in that same prompt. This comes in the wake of the aforementioned growing number of AI writers, particularly in the indie space where there seems to be no shortage of this stuff, and it's getting to the point where people are discrediting the indie writing space entirely, throwing salt on human independent writers without even giving them a chance. But let's say you're a reader who is actively trying to avoid AI, as I and many others are, and you want to know what to avoid. Or you may be wondering what this means for the general public's opinion on human-created artwork. Don't worry, I'll be covering those too. So if you're new here and you want to know more about this pattern and also how to detect the telltale signs of AI writing, then make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, then welcome back to the spaghetti layer. Anyway, strap your butts in because here we go! So you know what I said about the old days when authors would write out their stories word by word without having to rely on AI? Fortunately, and as I said at the beginning of the video, there are still many authors who write their books without the usage of AI, as people have done for centuries. Like, regular people. But there is still a concerning amount of authors who think it's okay to forego the actual creative process and use generative AI to do all of the work for them, whether that's the writing itself or the cover art. Since first making waves back in 2022, generative AI seems to have only gotten more accessible and more prolific, and it's now the driving force behind a surge of AI sham books that you'll find in places like the indie or online publishing space. There's even a whole list on Goodreads dedicated to authors who have used generative AI in any part of the creative process, along with several other lists that have books with telltale AI-isms. But let's look past any AI-generated covers you may find in your travels and get to the meat of the topic. In a space where AI-generated products are creeping into the indie space especially, it's important to be able to distinguish human-made writing from writing made by computers. But if for whatever reason that's something you're into, well, Whatever floats your boat, I guess. Anyhow, it's important to mention that just because one or more of these factors may appear in a book does not automatically mean it's been AI generated. Under most circumstances, these mistakes I'm about to mention could be easily chalked up to a lack of experience and the need for an editor/proofreader. In fact, I've been guilty of a couple of these errors myself in the past. And I also want to mention that, as an example, just because an author uses hyphens or em-dashes or whatever you want to call these things doesn't automatically make the book AI generated. Those have been around and in use since before the rise of generative AI. However, when a book shows most, if not all of these factors, then it may be a good idea to call the integrity of the work itself into question. Though it's also good to exercise caution and do some digging before jumping to conclusions. The first thing to keep an eye on is the timing of the publication between books, whether those books are part of a series or otherwise. Normally, books in a series may be published a year or more apart, but if a book series was made with AI, you may see subsequent releases be published 2 or 3 months apart from their previous installments. Again, this doesn't automatically mean the books were made with AI. In fact, I've seen a few human-made indie books published on a rapid release plan after the author has spent some years sitting on the manuscripts. For this factor specifically, though, I would also suggest digging into the author's publishing history to see if they've written anything before ChatGPT came into the picture. If they haven't, then that could be a valid cause for concern. As for the manuscript, that being the book's actual text, there are several factors you should keep in mind when determining whether or not this book is likely to be AI. While AI-generated manuscripts could present themselves in several different ways, there is still a pretty consistent pattern when it comes to this sort of thing. One of those is the structure of the sentences themselves. Each sentence should ideally strike a balance between style and substance without veering too far in either direction. When it comes to AI, though, the manuscripts could either read like some sort of textbook or study guide, not bothering to immerse the reader in the story, which is part of the crux of good storytelling, or it could go merrily into Purple Prose won the annual internet yapping triathlon territory. That being, if it sounds like unceasing pandering drivel that seems to go nowhere, then you may have AI writing on your hands. You should also pay attention to how the manuscript refers to certain nouns or uses certain adjectives, like walls that echo with the secrets of the universe or something. AI writing also has a tendency to be redundant in its prose. Bonus points if it uses the same phrase multiple times on a page, such as, "This was a testament to that." AI books also tend to directly violate the golden rule of writing, that being show don't tell. Everything, every detail, is hammered over the reader's head, and every little thing is explained in almost excruciating detail. Houses aren't just creations, they're meticulously planned masterpieces. Spears are used for combat, and shields are used for defense. Lamps aren't just light sources. They're marvels of the power of the human mind. You may also notice that when it comes to AI, things such as personal interactions and even descriptions of a person's eyes are assigned peculiar subtleties of meaning. For example, someone may speak with a combination of worry and provocation, or a combination of enthusiasm and fatigue. Someone's eyes may carry years of experience and understanding, reflecting the many experiences and ordeals they've been through. And you may also notice a startling lack of dialogue. And that's if the dialogue is telling and not showing. Another big sign of something likely being AI generated that I want to talk about is something I like to call a corporate-sounding synopsis. Under normal circumstances, that is, with human-created novels, synopses serve to hook the reader in and get them interested in wanting to read the body of the work, much like the very important first sentence of a story. To show an example of what a synopsis normally sounds like, I'll read the synopsis of one of my favorite books that I read last year, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. England in the 1520s is a heartbeat from disaster. If the king dies without a male heir, the country could be destroyed by civil war. Henry VIII wants to annul his marriage of 20 years and marry Anne Boleyn. The Pope and most of Europe opposes him. Into this impasse steps Thomas Cromwell, a wholly original man, a charmer and a bully, both idealist and opportunist, astute in reading people and implacable in his ambition. But Henry is volatile. One day tender, one day murderous. Cromwell rises to heights no one could have imagined. The Boleyns, the Howards, the old families and the new cannot fathom why the king so trusts and relies on a man with no title and an obscured past. Even after Cromwell's mentor, Cardinal Wolsey, falls from favor. Cromwell manages to deliver the king's wishes, but what will be the price of his triumph? In Wolf Hall, Hilary Mantel inhabits the fascinating mind of a man little understood and widely mythologized, bringing his influence on the making of Britain into new, dazzling light. And now, for a comparison, let's look at the synopsis of a title that I found in the lists of AI-generated books on Goodreads, Dreams of Alchemy by Jason Holloway. Dreams of Alchemy is the captivating first book in a spellbinding YA fantasy series, blending epic adventure, powerful friendships, and the relentless pursuit of transformation. Perfect for fans of high-stakes quests, intricate magic systems, and unforgettable heroes, this story will transport you to a world where alchemy is more than a science, it's destiny itself. Ideal for readers who, epic fantasy adventure with deep mystery and world building, character-driven storytelling where magic fuels personal growth, realm-spanning fantasy with rich lore and hidden realms, books like Mistborn, The Name of the Wind, and The Priory of the Orange Tree. Join Lyra, Kael, Mira, Alara, Rowan, and Alaric on an unforgettable quest where magic and alchemy collide, destinies are forged, and the boundaries of reality are tested. The journey begins now. Discover the magic of Dreams of Alchemy today. As you may have noticed, books that are more likely, or otherwise outright confirmed to be AI, tend to have synopses that read more as a checklist than a pitch to the potential reader. The synopsis doesn't hint at what to expect or make a genuine attempt to engage readers, so much as it tells you what the contents are like some sort of essay outline and hope you'll buy it hook, line, and sinker. And telltale AI signs don't just appear in the prose or the synopsis either. They can also show up in aspects such as locations and even character names. Just as an example, the name Alara is a name that ChatGPT frequently generates for female characters, especially when prompted to create stories in the speculative fiction or dark romance genre. The same goes for the name Kael, which in this scenario could be used as the masculine counterpart of the name Alara. Similarly, two common place names that ChatGPT frequently generates are Eldoria and Ethelgard. This can also go for all variations of the names I've just mentioned, whether that's Eldora or Elira or Kaelin or some other variant you may come across in your travels. Some AI books may use only one of these, others may use more than one or even all four. And having seen many AI-generated books while doing the research for this video, I can confirm there are a staggering number that use more than one of these names. While scouring the list of books that were marked as AI-generated, I came across a fantasy title called The Man That Follows God by Solomon King and Armani Wright. While it doesn't have a lot of reviews, I did notice that quite a few of those reviewers pointed out some of the issues that I had mentioned. One reviewer stated that while the authors poured time into world building and establishing character goals, the book read more like the book's Wikipedia page or outline as opposed to the book itself, recommending the show don't tell advice. Another reviewer said the story had good bones, but didn't think it qualified as a full story. A third said that there was too much wasted and repetitive content. And then there was one reviewer who went headlong into calling the story AI-generated, which, in light of the receipts and excerpts they procured, I won't lie, I'm inclined to believe it. Allegedly, the entire book consists of chapters, or archives that read more like summaries before ending with a summary of the summary. The same plot points are also supposedly repeated ad nauseum over the course of the book's 460 pages. Certain villains will come and go, only for new villains with the same names to pop up later in the story. Some chapters will end mid-sentence or continue into the next chapter. Yeah, do with that information what you will. Now, unlike The Man That Follows God, I can't definitively confirm whether this next book is AI-generated, but the contents of Elven Blood, the first entry in a 7-book series by Mark Stanley, had several people raising their eyebrows. The same person on Goodreads who brought out the receipts for The Man That Follows God panned it as, quote-unquote, the most successful AI-generated book I've seen so far, maybe. And apparently, Stanley even got well-known fantasy author Mark Lawrence to read a copy. Though it is worth mentioning that according to that same reviewer, Lawrence's review doesn't explicitly say that the book is good and merely suggests it may be for you if you like that sort of thing. Multiple reviewers pointed out the red flags that I mentioned earlier, namely the borderline absurd sentence structure, cadence and imbalance in action and exposition, over-reliance on modifiers, and more, leading multiple people to believe that it was made with AI. Not to mention Stanley supposedly hasn't published anything before ChatGPT was created. Again, I can't tell for sure whether Elven Blood is AI-generated, but in the event that it is in fact human-made, then I apologize for the lapse in judgment. But all of that aside, let's now look at a more recent and far more obvious example of, Hold on, why is my phone ringing? Hello, this is the Cup of Chamomile office. Yes, that's me. Wait. Huh? Short break? We have sponsors? Well, why didn't you tell me sooner? You there. Yes, you. Have you ever been in the middle of drawing a comic and want one of your characters to strike an epic pose? But it turns out like this instead? Yeah, I've been there too. But don't worry, mastery of your epic art skills is just one click away with Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes on topics that include illustration, design, photography, video, and more. These classes are taught by folks who represent the top of their creative disciplines, so you can level up in your creative journey worry-free. You'll also get curated sequences of classes to guide you towards your goals, an active community of fellow creators to give you feedback, and certificates and badges to help you celebrate your accomplishments. If you want to get inspired, learn new skills, and make new creative discoveries, look no further than Skillshare. But Chamomile, you may be thinking. What kind of classes can I expect on the platform? Well, you may have noticed the time lapses of me working on a short-form comic in the background. I'm always striving to improve, but admittedly there are some roadblocks that I want to get past, including one of my many nemeses, proportions. Fortunately, you can find a class for exactly that on Skillshare. 28-day drawing challenge, anatomy for illustration and comics, taught by Josiah Jazza Brooks. Yeah. That Jazza. I'm about 5 lessons into the class as of now, but I've already learned some valuable information when it comes to blocking and defining things like arms and general poses, and I'm excited to continue through the rest of the class. But wait, there's more! If you join Skillshare using this coupon code, you'll get your first month free. Yes, you heard that right. The first month is free. After all, what's better than having a wide breadth of knowledge at your fingertips? At a discount! You can also get this discount by clicking on the link in the description of this video, so don't miss this special opportunity to level up your skills. Thank you to the folks at Skillshare for sponsoring this video. And speaking of the video, let's get right back to the topic. Some AI authors may try their best to sweep their dirty work under the rug, but sometimes these sham writers aren't quite as sneaky. But how not sneaky are we talking about here? Let's now look at a more recent example of authors getting caught using AI to generate their stories. The Dark Hollow Academy series is a, so far, 3-book series by Lena McDonald. The series follows a heroine named Eden who can reflect supernatural powers back at their sources, along with 4 men with supernatural origins who, quote-unquote, really need to work on their sharing skills. Around May 2025, so a little over a month ago, McDonald came under fire and was accused of using AI in the series' second book, Dark Hollow Academy Year 2. Why did these accusations come pouring in, you might ask? In the book's 3rd chapter, one reader found a paragraph that reads, and I quote, "I've rewritten the passage to align more with Jabree's style, which features more tension, gritty undertones, and raw emotional subtext beneath the supernatural elements. If it sounds like something you'd find in ChatGPT, yeah, I really wouldn't blame you." Not only did McDonald leave a glaringly obvious AI prompt paragraph for everyone to see, the AI generator was being used to copy another author's style, that being Jabree, the author of the Bonds That Tie series along with several other novels. Now that's what I call a yikes. And apparently it's not as though this giant mess showed up without any warning. In the weeks leading up to the discovery, readers had less than favorable things to say about the first book. One review reads, "This had potential but couldn't finish it. Too much repetition of descriptions, sentences left unfinished, and confusing transitions from one scene to another. Plus, the FMC, or female main character, supposedly had no idea she was a supernatural, and yet seemed to know a lot about the world and supernaturals in it. The potential is there, but still needs a lot of work to make it a much more solid and enjoyable read." Another review says, "Honestly, I only made it 11%. This was pretty freaking rough. I would normally suggest a good editor, but I don't think that would even fix this. It would need an entire rewrite. The author tried really hard to make a complex, unique world filled with rich history, but it was just so massively convoluted and contradictory." Going back to what I said earlier, this is the sort of thing that I would have attributed to inexperience and needing an editor and some beta readers. But in light of the accusations and having read a sample of the first book for myself, the gripes that reviewers had don't come as much of a surprise at all. Not to mention the issues that the reviewers addressed are telltale signs that the writing is AI. McDonald went on to address the allegations sometime later, claiming that the prompt was something that should never have made it into the final version. Well, I can name one way it could have stayed out of the final version, but I digress. McDonald also claimed that she used AI to edit and shape parts of the book as she couldn't afford an editor, saying teaching wages make it hard to support a family. As a result, she turned to AI to help refine her writing. McDonald promised to be more transparent about her writing process in the future and apologized to the wider community. Honestly, though, I have my doubts. This isn't even covering all of the other AI-generated books that eagle-eyed readers have discovered. Nor is this the bottom of the iceberg. AI books aren't limited to novels that have the facade of originality. The advent and accessibility of generative AI has also made it easy for scammers to impersonate authors and sell bootleg versions of their books online. In 2023, Lisa Sun, the author of Gravitas, spotted fake workbooks in the suggested section on the Amazon page of her original book. Another author by the name of Jane Friedman found 6 bootleg works with her name on them around that same time. In February 2024, Marie Arana's book, Latino Land, A Portrait of America's Largest and Least Understood Minority, was released. And it was a book that Arana spent years writing and researching for. However, the day after its release, Arana discovered another book below the cover of her own, titled America's Largest and Least Understood Minority, A Summary of Latino Land. The AI fake was written by a certain Clara Bailey, who had supposedly published a number of these summaries and put them up for sale on Amazon. Bailey's books have since been removed from the platform, but her publishing history as of March 2024 could still be seen on Goodreads, which Amazon currently owns. As an article from the Authors Guild website states, these AI-generated scam companion books rarely rise to the level of fair use, as they have little to no original analysis or commentary and are meant only to confuse customers and skim sales off of the real books. Instead, the scam companion books simply regurgitate the key points of the original work in a condensed form, which is clearly infringing. And that brings me to another point that I wanted to make when it comes to generative AI. It fundamentally isn't capable of processes that can be considered original thought. Sure, it can offer points of inspiration for the user, but it relies on information that its users have given it to be functional in the first place, as demonstrated with the Dark Hollow Academy series. In other words, generative AI works at the expense of humans who have spent years honing their craft. However, in spite of all of this, there are multiple indicators that the general public still prefers human-made art. According to a SciPost article from 2023, 2 studies were conducted with the intention of discerning whether people did in fact have a preference for human art and to identify what factors contributed to the corresponding appraisals. In the first study, 149 participants were presented with 30 AI images, labeled as either human-created or AI-created. The participants rated each artwork based on criteria such as beauty, profundity, and worth. Only AI images were used in the first study to ensure a controlled and comparable stimulus set. While the differences between human and AI labels for surface-level aspects were not as significant, the participants tended to rate human-created artworks higher on all of these aspects, a preference that was more pronounced when it came to deeper aspects of art like worth and meaning. 148 participants were recruited for the second study, which also used the same 30 AI images from the first study. However, this time new criteria were added such as emotionality, perceived narrativity, perceived effort, personal meaning, and estimated time to create the artwork. The participants of the second study were also given various questionnaires to assess participants' cognitive abilities, empathy, beliefs about creativity, and attitudes towards AI. Again, the participants tended to prefer human-created art across all of the given criteria, and the researchers also found evidence that narratives and perceived effort were important factors that affected how people appreciated artworks. People valued the effort and labor that a human would put into creating the artwork. However, images labeled as AI-created seemed to be appreciated more on a surface level if it had a higher narrative level associated with it. Interesting find, but okay. The article then goes on to mention that art serves 2 purposes: surface-level enjoyment afforded through the senses and the viewer's response to aesthetic properties, as well as being a communicative medium from artist to audience. What does the art tell us? What is the deeper meaning that can't be gleaned at a surface level, and what emotion is being conveyed? While AI can make a pretty picture, that is, if you could ignore the hands and everything else, it underperformed on a communicative aspect. Speaking of studies, Claire Duffy, host of the podcast Terms of Service, sat down with Professor Sheena Iyengar, who conducted a separate study in 2023 where participants were asked to rate images that were labeled as human-created and AI-created. While the participants couldn't tell which was which at a glance, they still rated the images labeled as human-created higher, meaning they valued it more than images labeled as AI. So how does all of this factor into writing specifically, and what does this mean in a world where some people seem to care more about the destination than the journey? You know who you are. Let's look again at the results of the studies. People showed an appreciation for the effort and care that human creators put into the finished product. As it goes for visual artworks, the same applies to writing since visual and written art both require time and effort to complete. Generative AI, however, cuts out that fundamental and crucial part of the creative process entirely, leaving only an empty shell of what its finished product tries to masquerade as. I mean, imagine if you could paint the Mona Lisa or write the next big novel straight away without having ever touched a pencil. Convenient? Maybe. But it'd also be unsatisfying, unrewarding, and incredibly boring. Sure, you can argue that amendments can be made by humans after the product is generated, but my point still stands. Without the creative process, there would be no finished product. And if you disregard the journey and go straight to the destination just so you could have something with your name on it that you couldn't be bothered to actually write or draw, then what does that say about you? And that's not getting into the fact that some folks intend to use generative AI as a means to replace human artists, at the same time grossly underestimating just how much art and creativity influence society. Artists are the driving force behind some of your favorite movies, shows, and games. Art is a major component of architecture, fashion, the culinary arts, music, and much more. And it doesn't just pertain to speculative fiction. Even non-fiction books require years of research and development before they can even resemble a presentable product. Without the arts or the existence of the creative process, society as we all know it today would be very, very different. So having said that, what exactly do you mean by get a real job? I think that in the wake of this AI sham book tsunami, it's important that we call out the people who are willingly using this technology at the expense of human creators because, as I'm sure we all know, this is something that can be dangerous if it's left unregulated. At its core, generative AI imitates the data it's been given, but it's unaware of what it's actually doing and incapable of creating any new ideas of its own, which is where the art/intellectual property theft comes in. Now, would it be more ethical if it was trained off of royalty-free images and the work of consenting artists? Maybe. That would probably depend on who you ask. But even then, we also have to take environmental factors and required energy output into account. And generative AI requires a lot of energy to function at all. And regardless of what the answer to that question is, the general public deserves to know if something was made with AI. Because if you are going to sweep that under the rug, then I personally believe that just makes things look worse for you. At the same time, it's also very important to be cognizant of what is likely AI versus what likely isn't, since it's because of the rise of generative AI that human artists and creatives are being accused of using it, often because their styles look too similar to AI or they make innocent mistakes. As if we all don't struggle with drawing hands. In fact, I've heard of people closing their accounts over these false accusations, and it's disheartening to see. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this problem is leading people to disregard the indie space entirely, which is also disheartening. Especially since one of my favorite reads was independently published, and I've seen independent writers put their soul into their work the same way traditionally published authors do. And we should continue to create, lest we allow the industry to get overrun by unregulated slop that throws substance and meaning out the window. But I've been yapping about this enough, so I'm going to conclude this video by paraphrasing something that I said the last time I brought up generative AI. If you want to call yourself a writer, maybe consider actually learning the craft. But anyway, that is going to do it for this video. If you like this video and want to see more from me, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and stay tuned for upcoming art-related videos and other shenanigans. If you want to support me further, please check out my other social media accounts as well as my Ko-fi and my Etsy shop, which are all in the description. And lastly, if you made it this far, leave a potato emoji in the comment section below. And remember to keep things civil in the comments, or I will put a whoopee cushion in your chair when you least expect it. And yeah, that's about everything. Thanks for watching.